So, what's your name?
My name is Kay.
And are you comfortable sharing, for example, your background?
I'm very comfortable sharing anything about my life.
So, why don't you tell us about how you came to Vancouver?
So the way that I came to Vancouver, I came from the East Coast actually, from Quebec and then Ontario. I know. We immigrated in Montreal from East Africa, from a small country called Burundi.
And
And because we were colonized by the Belgians, by default we speak French, so that's why we immigrated to Montreal. And then my parents then got divorced, and we moved with my mom, my sibling, and I to Ontario. And actually, when we left the country, we first went to South Africa for a year. So that's how I learned a bit of English. So then, when we went to Ontario, both my sibling and I, we had some background, a little bit of English, and my mom wanted us to be bilingual. And for I don't know, those who lived in Ottawa or who have ever been in Ottawa, it's not exactly the city I wanted to be in, especially coming from Montreal. It's very slow, it's governmental. So I decided that I would go as far west as I could, and that was Vancouver. And that's how I came to Vancouver.
so, in two or three words, how do you feel about Vancouver?
How do I feel about Vancouver in 2 or 3 words? Oh, healthy. Um, I would say that there's a lot of opportunity here in Vancouver, but that if we're talking about community, it's a bit harder to get into a community or to stick with a community
So, when you mean community, community in general,
in
and
general.
more specifically the Black community, what would you define as the Black community here in Vancouver? How would you define it?
I would define it, from my personal experience, I would define the Black community as um, almost like a ghost. It's like you know that there is that we have Black people. You see them around, but it's almost like it's not really tangible. You don't really see people in community actually. Even gatherings are really hard to find. Community events are really hard to find. And then if you do find them, it's hard to stay in touch with people for some reason.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Kay, why don't you tell us what you know about Hogan's Alley?
What I know about Hogan's Alley, well, from the bit of research that I did, um, if I can, like in a few words, it felt like the hub. It felt like a very vibrant hub, which is really interesting because now and before I did any research, you cannot find any traces of it. You would not ever think that it was even what it was or what it seemed to be from the research or from whatever was, yeah, from what you can find online. Um, and it felt more like Montreal actually, like a melting pot. And people from all over the place, whether it's the BIPOC community or the Chinese community, they're all gathered here and just doing their thing, really.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. What do you think the significance of the disappearance of this history that you're mentioning? What impact do you think that would make on our community? You said the Black community in Vancouver feels like a ghost. Can you connect that to how Hogan's Alley is like there's traces or scraps of history around?
Um, I think for me, when I think about it, I think you can trace it back to the lack of history, heritage that we have here in Vancouver. Because just like anything else, if you don't really know where you came from, then it's kind of always hard to connect to your roots, right? And we can see that even with um, the way that, let's say, the West African slaves or other slaves have been brought to different places in the world and have developed their own culture. And for some time, until maybe in the recent decades, they didn't really feel connected to their roots, which makes sense because if we don't share stories, if we don't gather and exchange and keep our heritage, then it's really hard to connect. So in that way, I feel like it does contribute to this sense of ghost in Vancouver.
So tell me about, let's talk about that, sharing stories. What do you think is the importance of sharing stories?
Um, the importance of sharing stories. To me, it's almost like, I mean, it's how we learn. It's connection and it's how we learn because even for myself, I've never known my grandparents, and if it wasn't for my parents sharing their stories, I would not know, what they were about, what was happening in their lives, in the world at that time, and also the different things or different parts of myself that I find in them, in those stories, and how I can better understand myself and sometimes maybe even be more accepting of myself or of certain traits, understanding that these came from my great parents or things like that.
You gotta love Vancouver.
Yes, you do.
Shout out to Guru. Yeah, I love that song too.
Yeah.
So, quick question. So what do you think it is the importance of preserving this site, of preserving Hogan's Alley and getting these stories on film? Like, what do you think it would contribute to Vancouver and the ghost-like Black community?
I think preserving the stories, whether from our ancestors or all these other communities that were here before, is important because it's almost like it feels like having a core, and in a way, I feel like even when you know yourself, it's if you know your core, you know what you're about, right? And you feel more confident. You feel more free in a way too, right? And the natural need to connect and to be with others is just there. It's not an effort.
Absolutely. Kay, is there anything else you would like to add? Like, what were some of the contributions or descendants of Black Canadians that you would like people to know about us in Canada? Like, what's missing from our narrative?
I think the first thing that comes to mind of what is missing from the Black Canadian heritage is just knowledge, really, and presence. Because even from my personal experience, I can't really say that I know much about the Black Canadians that were here before us.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we were not there when we were, and we did contribute to the growth and evolution of the whole country, not even just Vancouver City.
Yes, and you're standing on the site right now of Vi's Chicken Inn, which was Nora Hendrick worked here, historical Black site. And if we look at it, you probably couldn't tell that there was a thriving business right behind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we want to thank you for your time, Kate.
Thank you
very,
for the
very
opportunity
much.
too.
And any last comments for the camera?
None that I can think of.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Kate.
you.